You're good. You're good. Uh, sorry. We're talking about this whole thing about the 50s. When we're online, we tend to hear this thing about the 50s, this revisionist history when it becomes talking about the 50s, right? All the great things. We want to go back to a time of the 50s, all this different stuff, right? And I think we really need to have a conversation about it. When we are, really, were the 1950s really as good as people try to make it out to be? Because this is a consistent narrative and talking point that we tend to see out here when it comes to social media. A lot of people, especially in a lot of different sectors, talk about the 50s. And I kind of want to get a little bit into a lot of that different stuff. Now, you might be wondering, what's with all the hype? What's with all the hype about the time when we weren't even born in, to be honest with you. Most people who are advocating for this stuff weren't even born during that time. Like, it's the good old days of family values, of community bonding, and of course, the simpler times of living. But was it really amazing for everyone? Let's just talk about that. Or is this really a nostalgic glow that, for the most part, I would say that most people want to feel like they had most power in that particular era, while others are getting stuck in I would say, with a far less than ideal situation in what was looked at as the suburban dream. And I think that's something that will really get into. I think we should really get into a talk about really what the gender roles were, the ideas of economic prosperity. I want to talk about a little bit about the whole civil rights thing and how much of that quote American dream was actually accessible for a lot of people. So if you haven't already, guys, this is your opportunity. Go to your favorite area, get your drinks, get your favorite snacks, or whatever. And I want you guys to settle in because I think this is gonna be a good conversation. And let's really unpack the ideas of what people really think was so well about the 1950s. Was it all that it was cracked up to be? Or let's just be honest, is some people just really going back into memory and just really thinking it was a great thing that they have really no concept about. So before we get into that, you know what I like to do, guys. I like to, of course, appreciate everybody who's already come into the building. So we got Ron, who's already came here. He was the first one. Thank you very much for walking up in here. We got Caucasian Sasquatches up in here. Appreciate you very much. No Chaser in the building. Cousin Lawrence, of course, over here. And the lovely Lady Luck. And by the way, if you're coming into the building, I know some people like to sit back, or like to watch whatever, but feel free to say hi up in the building so that everybody feels your presence. We like to have in the community and actually a chat that actually like to really have discussion with each other, like to have that solid engagement with one another. With that being said, let's start a little bit of getting into this. And I think one of the first things we need to talk about is the economic boom that people looked at when it comes to the 50s, right? I had to do a little bit of research to make sure that I could talk a little bit about this topic because a lot of people talk about it, but a lot of people are very subjective in their things. It's like picking out values. It's like picking out your favorite inspirational people. It's like picking out the Bible. People like to cherry pick. They don't like to give the entire thing. So first thing I want to talk about is the economic boom and who exactly was it good for? You know, when I think about the economic landscape, and sure, I want to talk about post World War II, that particular era. And after that era, how it brought forth this big booming economy. Now, there was home ownership was on the rise. I think people had more disposable income back then. Keep in mind, income is way different from then than how it's looked at now. And there was also a thriving middle class that was like also expanding. But we have to take a closer look at all that stuff, right? Actually, let me boost my volume to make sure that you guys hear me pretty solid. Make sure it's not too loud. That you guys hear me on a pretty steady note. I think you guys are gonna get a better sound from me now. I would say most of this sense of prosperity was going on, especially in white Americans, societies, particularly with men who had access to opportunities. They had access to opportunity programs like the GI Bills because we were already coming from a post World War II era. But for racial minorities, however, this prosperity didn't reach them in the same way. For I would say for Black Americans who face rampant housing discriminations, effectively people who are being barred from particular benefits, especially when it comes to the idea of the suburban lifestyle, this wasn't necessarily the case. And then we have women. Women primarily expected to stay at home, raise kids, and tend to the house, right? So when we say economic booms, right? Was it really universal? Or was it really reserved for the few people who had access to it? It's a question that I'm just putting out there for many people. What's up? What's going on? We got the porch session that's walking up in here. One of my favorite areas to be in, guys. So let's open it up a little bit because is it fair to celebrate an era of prosperity when, to be honest with you, it was so restricted? It was. And does this economic success mean, does it mean that if it comes at an expense to everyone else's opportunity, is it really that great? So I'll look at my second point for segment two, which is the the ideal family structure. Was it more confining than than basically conforming? This is a question of that. So let's talk a little bit about family dynamics. When people say the 50s were better times for relationships, let's just be honest, they often are talking about the means of the classic setup. Dad goes to work, mom stays at home, and everything is, quote, picture perfect. But were these really happy families? Or was it a setup that pretty much boxed people into restrictive roles? Put it that way, to be very fair to it. Because women, for one, had little access to careers or even independence. Not to say that women didn't work. I want to make sure I make that clear because I can already feel women getting their buttholes puckered, and I appreciate you for that. I like you. I like you doing your little thing. Uh, but the idea that they had lack of career and even independence, they were facing immense pressures to conform to this, quote, perfect wife mold. A divorce was less common, but let's just be honest. Does that mean that people were necessarily happy within their marriages just because divorce was less? Or I could say just less likely to leave their marriages because there wasn't a lot of that they can leave marriages for. And let's not forget, men in that great era may have felt more pressure to fit into this provider role, regardless of whether it was truly suited for them. I know when we get into the space and people talk about a whole bunch of stuff, they like to talk about being the provider, not understanding that not every man wished to be in that role. We always had bachelors. I know people like to talk in the space like every man was to be a provider because every man wanted to be married. When there have been bachelors throughout human history, there have been people who have always sought to be alone. Even some of our greatest inventors were people who were never married, or people who didn't want to get married, or people who just like to have their freedom and independence. So while these roles might sound appealing to some now, they were definitely in areas that came as a limitation to others. Does this sound like an ideal that we want to return to in today's era? Or have we outgrown this setup in favor of a more personal freedom? And to those guys who romanticize the 50s dynamics. Would it really be fulfilling to be the one to be living the one-dimensional breadwinner lifestyle today in today's market? Today. Not what it was reminiscent of back then, but today's market. I'll go into my third point, which is talking about because I hear this lifestyle being thing, especially pushed in my area of black people, the black sector, if you want to put it that way. So let's talk about civil rights and the ignoring of reality of that particular era. Because a big part of the 50s that's easily glossed over is the civil rights. Civil rights and the deep racial divide that happened within America. Hey, Jess, what's going on? Yo, CJ, appreciate you showing up, man. They forget about that. They don't really talk about that when they start talking about the 50s. Segregation was still legal, and the civil rights movement was only just beginning, folks. It was just only beginning to gain traction. People who claim that the 50s were this time of stability and community, Jesus Christ, they are honking those horns. I think they overlook the massive inequalities that were actually taking place during that time. I think the reality is that not everyone had this so-called American dream granted to them. Black Americans were segregated. They were kept out of certain neighborhoods. They were kept out of certain schools, and they were even kept away from certain job opportunities. This nostalgic view of the 50s often whitewashes the very real struggles that millions of people faced. I'm just going to put it out there like that. It's almost like there were two Americas back then, the idealized version and the one that was still painfully divided. Can we really say that we can celebrate the 50s as if they were better times when it actively excluded so many people? And for those nostalgic for a simpler time that they really have no inclination about, is this historical amnesia? Or is there something valuable about the sense of community that's just being missed, that they have actually missed? So let's talk about that. I'll go into my fourth point, which is romanticized versus the reality versus the real. Do we only see the good parts when we start going through revisionist history? This romanticized version of the 50 that leaves out all the complexities and the realities that shaped that particular era. That political paranoia of like McCarthyism, the limited educational and career opportunities for women. What about the like I said, segregation, where all the things that people had to go through were real issues? So why do we only remember the good parts that are just cherry picked, if you ask me? Like I said, people do it. Like when they talk about particular eras of finance, when they talk about particular eras of the Bible, I'll even say, why do we cherry pick when we want to look at things? We only romanticize the good parts, but we don't take along the lessons of the bad things that also took place, because there were definitely bad things. Is it because we crave a more simpler world? Or is it we prefer to overlook the dark side of history? I mean, to be real, some people miss the idea of traditional values, of stable jobs, and this tight knit families. And it sounds nice, but nostalgia has a way of making things looking better than it actually were. Are we all just searching for more simplicity when it comes to the complexity of this increasing world? Is there a version of the quote good old days that we could bring into today's world without the restrictions? And I gotta say, what do we gain or lose by remembering the ways of the past? That's my thought, guys. That's what I'm really asking the question of. This is a short one because I don't have any answers. I don't even have a really a lot of perspective in it. I just know what a lot of people like to say. So, you know what I'm going to do right now? I am going to drop the link in the chat. I'm going to drop the link. And we can have a particular discussion when it comes to that. I'm not long stroking you today. I want to have this conversation because it is a common point that is actually made in a lot of different sectors. So if you guys want to get yourself together, you want to get your points and everything that I just mentioned, or if there's something you really want to go through before you just have to answer it, I'm gonna have you do that. I'm going to have you do that. In the meantime, I'm gonna go through what was going on here in the chat, and what I'll do is I'll take the moment to promote in the meantime. So let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're thinking, guys.
Is Resto Chesto?
Crystal made this shit.
Push, real drink, like you a blood, sit baby still, fast and fly. Evidence plain, no dick hole, no blankety black shit. We chillin' with the crew. You welcome for the session. I hope your time was pleasant. Now did you learn your lesson? Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Yeah. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Yeah. Welcome to the porch. Grab you a drink, light you a blunt, sit back and steal, facts fly. Evidence playing, no dick holding, no blackity black shit. We chillin' with the crew. You welcome for the session. I hope your time was pleasant. Now did you learn your lesson? Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Yeah. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Welcome to the porch. Yeah. 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 Welcome to the porch.
All right. Wrong area. All right, guys. So it seems like we have no takers. So I don't know how many people realize this, but I know when I get into particular sectors, particular spheres, that the 50s are something that's actually brought up quite a bit. And I'm always wondering to myself, oh my goodness, this again, like we were talking about the 50s. Yeah. And I wonder what makes people dive into an era that they know relatively very little about. Yet we hear it portrayed all the time. Well, let me not say we. Now you guys don't really probably don't hang out in a lot of areas of sectors that I am. But I will say this is something that has become a common trope, a common talking point that happens within black spaces. Hey, Lady Luck, what's going on? Appreciate you coming to the panel.
Hello, Resla. How you going?
I'm good. I'm good. I didn't think I was going to stream today, but I said I'm going to do it. Normally, I put out community posts, but I said I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
What do you think about the subject?
So I think that maybe there's something in the way that we are today that makes us want to go to that particular era. There's something about the way we are as people today that makes us want to go back to that era and kind of pick and select what we look at that's positive and ignore the negatives.
So
What do you think?
let me ask you a question. You're born and raised in Australia, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know what it was like over there growing up, or how they look at their history when it comes to being quote in the 50s. I know over here, especially in black areas, they love to talk about how, especially in terms of relationship and family dynamics, that the 50s was just so great. But they also don't take a look at all the struggles that families have to go through in that particular time. And that's why I'm always wondering what people's perspectives are, especially people who have gone through those particular things, but not necessarily with the American black eyes. Because I think we all have had some idea of what we heard about the 50s. And that's why I want to know what people's perspectives are.
Okay. Well, in Australia in the 50s, I've heard from people because that's before my era that it was very much the husband goes out to work, the wife is a wife and a mother, she's not to work. And as far as the segregation thing goes, there is still a pub in Western Australia that's segregated, which is really, really sad, in my opinion. I know this because we went to the town the pub was in, and my uncle has Mediterranean skin, and the local Aborigines thought he was an Aboriginal, and they took him into the pub and they shouted him drinks all day because they thought he was an Aboriginal. They took him into the black pub.
That's terrible. I mean, it's terrible, but for some
That it's
reason,
still here, that it's still segregated. Yes, it is. It's
yeah,
disgusting.
yeah. Well, so we have people. So, but that's also the tropes and the bad things that happened in the past, and especially the fact that it's still segregated. Now, I can't say that in every area. I would say for a good part, there are a lot of places that are still segregated, but not segregated. I mean, even if you look at in areas of reservation lands, there's still some segregation there. So what you can do and what you can do, what you're able to buy and what you're able to not, because it's considered reserved land. But then also just when I have this conversation with people, or rather I hear what they say, I try not to have conversations anymore about it. But there is this reminiscing, these good times when it comes to how they look at the black family. And I'm like, you have no idea what the fuck they were going through, because there's also bad things that were going on during those ages, if you want to look at them as struggles. But yet they always try to say that it was great. And I'm like, you have no clue what it was like. You go back and you think that it was great because, and let me just say this. I think, and I'll just say for men, because I don't hear women push this forward. I think men who are reminiscing about the good old days, the glory days of things, because quite frankly, they're just a little upset that those guys had power, position over the ladies. And that's not something that they wish to have for today. There's this
I
idea that they
I
would
agree
love.
with that.
It's a nasty thing to say, and I know people will even get mad at me for saying, "Oh, he's caping for women." No, it's not a matter of that. They'll still say whatever they want anyway. There's no change in someone's mind who feel like they are powerless themselves. I'll just put
Yes.
it that way.
Yeah.
So I know there are
So,
people will go up against me for that. But what's your thoughts on that?
I agree on that. Absolutely, because in today's age, men feel powerless in a lot of ways. They really do. And I know somebody who was born in the early 50s in Australia, who was half Indigenous. And believe me, life in Australia for Indigenous people in the 50s was disgraceful. Nothing short of disgraceful. And I'm sure it's pretty much the same in America in the 50s for Indigenous people. And this person I know, he was taken off his mother at 6 weeks old because she was Aboriginal, and the government decided that because she was young and an Aboriginal, she could not be responsible for a child. So they took her off him at
That's
6
crazy.
weeks old. Yep, and he was given to a Scottish family and raised um, in the English ways. And they really never talked about his Indigenous background with him, where he come from, his identity. He lost that growing up. And then only about 10 years ago, the government offered him $5,000 as compensation for his pain and suffering. And his mother actually died when he was 4 years old. So it's not like he grew up and had a chance to go and meet her. That
Right.
wasn't on the cards. But $5,000 to cover the cost. And of course, he didn't take it.
It's weird too to say that, oh yeah, this is what we think that your possible relationship, your family, your blood, this is what we think it costs. Like, how did you come up with the price for that? It's weird.
I
And
know.
Jess, I agree with you. Most people talk about women that were in the household, but we also have to remember this: the same way how they turn around and say, "Well, there were families who did," it's not like American families were this lifestyle, like say, like Indian or Chinese or whatever, or Asian, I should just say, not Chinese, because it's so much, where there were arranged marriages. In fact, for most part, Americans had to just figure it out and find your own mate. So the idea of thinking that most women, or the majority of women, the same way how we can also talk about men, were people who were married was crazy. There were definitely single women out there, the same way how there were single men out there, and they had to figure it out. Would you think those single women who were not married did not work? They absolutely did. The same way there were single men who actually had to work. It's not like everybody had a spouse. That wasn't the thing. And it's
But
just
that,
been like that throughout all of human history. There have definitely been cavemen who partnered, and then cavemen who didn't get any and they just died off.
but there was also women who would judge as to why they weren't married either.
I
And probably
agree.
men as well. Probably
Yes,
men as well.
they were.
They were seen as kind of, there must be some kind of defect or something wrong with them.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: to say that, well, there was a woman that wasn't picked, which means that she was ill-equipped, she wasn't useful, you know, rather than the guy. It was worse on him. Like, there are women out there, you can't just pick one. Worse, that you can't get one, but there are definitely single women out there, but you can't even. You're saying there's no one for you, not even quote an ugly woman or whatever. There's no one that's before you. I think it was definitely a bigger stigma on men that couldn't find women, because at least a woman, let's just say she's with family, she stayed with women. Well, she stayed with family, until like so and so passed away or whatever. But she had a house where she could still be under. She still had, for the religious context, she still had a covering. She still had her father. For men, that wasn't the case. You couldn't stay in the household. You had to get the fuck out there.
That's
That's it.
correct. And usually by about 15 years old, men were expected to have left school and got some kind of apprenticeship or job or income going
Correct.
already.
Correct.
Mum and dad weren't looking after you in your 20s.
Yeah, that wasn't the same thing for women. They were still able to be in the household. It still may
Yeah,
have been bad, but they were still able to have a covering. They weren't really still at risk of being homeless.
no,
And that's something that
no.
the guys had to deal with.
So what do you think it is about today that makes us want to go back to the 50s? Why are we idealising that particular era? Because there was so much wrong with that era that, like you were saying, there's so much that people are putting the blinders on and not wanting to look at from that era.
I
Does
will
that say
say,
something? Does that say something about what we are as a society today?
I think it absolutely does. But I think it's also the fact that there's an acknowledgement, there's a secret acknowledgement that we're not talking about. And it's simply that people have more personal freedom now than ever before. Let's just be
That's
honest. As
true.
much as people want to talk about whatever, there are a lot of men that are simply just stating that there was more personal freedom than ever before. Like, there are guys now who will talk so much about a woman's place and what a woman should do and how a woman should be a wife and how women should be raised to be wives and such, and I will be the one to pay for, I'll be the breadwinner. And this is why I even talked about in today's society, just how technology has moved and so many industries that we have. Do you think that you could still be that guy today? For most men, the answer is no, because most guys are not working, you know, steel jobs, labor jobs, or whatever. There are definitely men who are working that, but even logistics and steel and carpentry, all that shit is shifted. A lot of those jobs have become very much automated. Do you think that you would still be able to thrive the same way? I will say that the answer is a resounding no. And to those men who actually have daughters and never had sons, let's just be honest. A lot of those guys who I see, they push their daughters to be independent. So what means they're even pushing their daughters to, quote, not rely on other men. That means they're pushing for personal freedoms. To men that are actually raising boys, they're not pushing them to couple up with women. They're pushing their boys for ultimate and freedom to be an individual. That's the way how society has pushed people in general. So I think with
So
that
how does that?
out there,
So how does that? What we're pushing men and women to be today, our sons and daughters to be today, how does that align if we were to go back to the 50s? Independent women in the 50s? I don't think so. We
I
were
don't think
wives and
so
mothers.
either. Yeah, well, the difference. Let's just be honest. The difference between then and now is that the idea of women being pushed to be independent was actually It's shameful. If she had to be independent, it was saying that nobody wanted her. I'll even say as far as the code of culture, she was leftover women. She was a leftover woman. Nobody desired her. Rather than it is a virtue to be a single independent woman today. It's a difference. You can't find a woman, you weren't trusted. Even if you had married friends, you could not be seen next to a married man because that would be a stigma that something could be going on or that woman is trying to get someone else's man. You were looked at as a potential homewrecker. Now, no, that's not the case. Married women have single women all around them. And worse, they'll have those single women basically saying, girl, you need to be on your own, pushing for them to be single, even though they're in a married household.
So do you think that there could be an element here of narcissism where we're wanting to look at that era in a positive way and ignore the negatives? And like in today's world, there's a lot of issues in the world, and we kind of turn a blind eye to them. So do you think the narcissism of today is why that era might be a good era for us to look at and ignore the negatives? Just a
Well,
question.
Well, I think when we look at this, I think we have to look at it in terms of what people don't really want to talk about, but it's real. And that's just the shift, not in just behavior, but power. Let's be honest. When we hear about the 50s, how great families were in the 50s, these what I tend to hear of, and I've heard some women say it, but I really look at a lot of men who say it because it was a time of more power, more control. When you hear a lot of women talk about it, especially in this age, what they hear is subjugation and even slavery. I don't want to be like how my mother and my grandmother was because they didn't have any say. And the men who I hear talk about this talk about they want ultimate say at the end of the day. When women have always been advisors or anything else, but at the end of the day, if I say whatever, even despite the fact she gives good advice or bad advice, my word is the one that rules at the end of the day. And I think men want today, especially because they have no inclination of what that really felt like, control. They want nostalgia over a time that sounds good because they never really experienced it. Because it gives them power. And women are saying, I'm not giving you that power. at all.
Well, you know what amazes me of I met this girl years ago and she used to dress very much like in the 50s. And she'd go to work every day in a professional role and she'd say to me, "Oh, you know, I wish I lived back in the 50s." And I said to her, if we lived back in the 50s, you wouldn't be in a professional role, you'd be at home with as a wife and mother." And she looked at me and said, "What?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't be." And I said, "Yes, you would be. That's the
Hmm.
era that you're romanticising and dressing like is an era where you don't go to work every morning in a professional role. You're at home as a wife and mother." And
Hmm.
she didn't believe me. She says
Yes.
to me, and I said to her, "You need to go back in history, you need to do your research and your reading, and you need to get up with the times that you're romanticising."
Let's just say if you were early enough in that dual income household, honey, I just like to work because I like to feel busy. Let's just say she's the wife that doesn't have kids. And I just don't want to be at home. I can get all this done in about 4 hours. I really want to work, even if it's part time. I want to be a part time secretary or whatever. I want to be a part time call, a switch call. I don't know why I can't think of the name, but call switch operator, whatever, part time. And the husband's like, you know what? I don't want you being here bored all day. Absolutely, you want to bring in income. It's not like she was able to just willingly spend that money because most of the time she had to give that money to her husband. Because why? Women were not allowed to open up bank accounts.
That's correct. And were women allowed to vote in the 50s in America?
No, no.
Wow.
So it's like,
Mm,
are you
sounds
are you
great. I think I want
sure?
to go back there.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, but there are so many men who look at it as the good old days. But my point that I'm making is like it depends on what your situation was, which is why I brought it up. For a lot of guys, especially right after World War II, you had incentives, and unfortunately, the people who were vets that coming out of that war, if you ask me, were treated well, were treated with more respect than the vets that we have today. You know, and in addition to that, with all the other social issues, like I said, black people were still segregated, even though their quote were on the rise. The idea that people will sit there and romanticize that things were just so much better back then, not and just disregarding all the other struggles that minorities were dealing with. Keep in mind, I'm talking about black people because I hear a lot of black people talk about it. I don't really see a lot of Latin or Indian spaces to know what their opinions were of the 50s. And I tried. I really, really tried. It was just really hard to find. Um, and I just think like, why are you romanticizing that? You know, when I hear a lot of people, I hear about slavery and black people, slavery, 50s, Jim Crow. And I'm thinking there was so much terrible shit, but they love to always pick out all the positive things from it without taking the negative. And I say, we got to stop cherry picking. If you want to take one thing in, you got to take everything in. That's just my
That's
thought.
true. That's true. You can't just pick and choose. I mean,
They
and if
love to pick and
and,
choose.
and if you and if you look at the whole era, I don't think we can get back to that time.
Well, I mean, it's hard to get back to a time when you have no real tangible beneficial strategy to bring somebody back into it. Because even the traditional wife of this age, and there are some traditional women, and when I say traditional, like I know people lose their mind because of what the internet is, but I saw a traditional wife who comes in, very beautiful woman, no kids, but she cooks, she cleans, she's a homemaker, she gives sound advice, she goes to the work functions for her husband, she bigs her husband up. And I think while these are not the cliff notes of what traditional wives are, it is something that you don't even really see into household a lot of households that are married today.
That's true. You don't. You really don't.
Yeah, and I think a lot of men, and I get when a lot of men say this, how can women today, modern women, expect traditional men without being traditional women? I agree, but I would say, how can you expect to have a traditional man if you're not going to be? How can you want a traditional man if you're not going to be a traditional woman? That's it. Because if you
That's
still
right.
want him
It
to
should
do
go
all
both
the
ways.
things, yeah, if you still want him to do all the things that traditional men did, then that means you should acquiesce to being a traditional woman. That's just what I look at. But if you just want a man who just has decent values, And I think that's where we got kind of mixed up, especially during the lockdown, the COVID age or whatever, when this whole big thing about high value men popped up. Because there's a difference between a high value, I'll just say high caliber man versus just men of value. Men of value are everywhere. If you're looking for a specific high caliber man, then that's something totally different. Because you're looking for a lifestyle, you're not looking for a particular person with values. That's it.
That's
That's the
correct.
difference that I see.
And then, of course, we had TV shows that glorified that era, that we watched as kids growing up.
Mhm.
Yes, like Leave It to Beaver and, shows like that showed traditional roles, and a lot of people grew up with that on their televisions, so that was all they kind of aspired to be as they got older.
Yeah,
Yep,
I agree. I find it interesting, especially because we push more people to be more independent than anywhere else, but we cannot find. I always say, if you want to convince someone of doing something that you think would be beneficial for society, then you have to highlight all the great things about it. And I think that a lot of people spend more time complaining about a particular thing than actually advocating as to why something's good. As much as they do want to talk about, it was great because that, it was great for you. Why would it be great for them? And they lose. They lose that perspective. Well, because you ain't got to. Let's just say, for the guy talking about women, well, then you ain't got to do shit. You can just be at home. Cool. That might be great for her, but then you'll complain that she does shit. She does nothing all day. This is what you advocated for.
that's true.
That's what you
That's
advocated
true.
for.
And you can't have it both ways.
That's correct. You can't. I mean, let's just be honest. How many men are putting themselves in position? I know, but let me just say this right now, because there's so many men that are sitting there talking like they're all six-figure men. They're all men in the boardrooms. They're all men going to the social parties. They're not. So how many men are out there? I'm just asking the question, not taking any particular size. I'm asking a question. How many men are in those particular situations? I would say a lot of them are not. Are not.
Oh,
A lot of men are just average men. And that's cool. I'm an average guy. Despite what people think.
that's true. Most men are average men. But yeah, there was so much going on in the 50s. Like you said, it was post-war, and there was advances in science at the time, and but there was still, like your segregation, there was still gender roles, there was still so many of the negatives, and so for some reason we just seem conditioned to look back at the positives and try and ignore the negatives. And I'm really glad for your show today, Resla, to highlight that it isn't all roses in the garden.
I mean, I think, like I said, people love to cherry pick. And I get it. It's mainly talking points because then it gets people riled up and give their own perspective on something. But I think we lose the nuance in the conversation. I and this is what a problem I just have with people who want to have particular conversation. I love the fact that they even bring those things up, but it's we get lost in translation because people love to highlight the good things, the things that really think that they work for them, but they don't want to highlight the bad. And that's what something I want to do here. I want to talk about the good, but I also want to talk about the bad and even the ugly. And we need to get down to the base part of the conversation. Lauren, thanks for
Well,
coming
well,
in.
well I
Great.
think the ugly.
Hold on.
I think the ugly would be the race segregation. To me, that's the ugly.
Well, yeah. Well, but not everybody deals with segregation. This is why I would love to do more research to know what was happening, especially in the 50s for Asian and Latin people and even Native Americans. It's a lot of work that I have to sift through because it gets so convoluted with what's going on, and you can't
Well,
really talk. Yeah.
in the 60s, my mother is half Italian, and in the 60s, she used to always get called a wog, a WOG, in Australia
Okay.
because she had the dark hair and the olive skin. Um, they always used to call, in Australia, they call them all wogs. Like if you were Greek or Italian, you were classed as a wog. And my grandmother, actually, my dad's mother, actually saw my mother and said to my father not to have anything to do with the wogs who live across the road.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. So he was forbidden from talking to her, but somehow he married her against my grandmother's wishes. My grandmother actually wouldn't sign for them to get married. She refused because of my mother's ethnicity. And they had to go and get a judge to sign off on their marriage because of racism
That's wild.
in the 60s
That's wild.
when they got.
I mean, it's salute to judges that were still impartial to the fact that they can still do that, you know. But I know there were plenty of families who were against things like that. I mean, keep in mind we still deal with people who have biases today, but
Yeah,
it's the ideal. I mean that's a totally different thing when we're talking about racism. But it was like the aspect of like in today's society to think that old measures like that would be the things that are still haunting us today. You know,
exactly.
and I think a lot of people should really get, and I know I hate to say this is gonna sound like this because I hate the word myself because it gets mixed up on basically what people think it means, and that's the word empathy. But if you are not cognizant enough to be able to understand, if you're not able to put yourself in what the situation might be for other people, you're not you're not looking for any real change because that means you cannot be the most effective that you can be. I'm not saying that you should change it up for other people, but I'm saying if you cannot understand why women today, right, would see those things as a disadvantage, then you can't make the best case for why they should be able to, why not be able to, but why they should aim for those things than not. Instead of you just complaining, it was great for us and it was great for you because you get taken care of. Maybe not all women wanted to be taken care of. That's why they pushed forward in the first place, right? They didn't want
That's
to
true.
rely.
But
So
yeah,
if you're
like
not
you said,
pushing forward,
if
yeah,
like you said, if you're incapable of looking at the whole situation overall and you can't be objective, you can't really make statements that something's good if you're incapable of looking at things objectively. You're
right.
right.
Right. I always say if you want to understand the best way to convince someone else is that you have to understand their arguments. And I think too many people just say, you need to understand my side because it would be better for you if you saw it my way. And I'm like, no, no, you need to understand their part and then say, how can I be able to have them be on my side by make not only making it relatable, but also putting it in a way that they would say, I'd be willing to give up some things, and if I can have a part of what I want, if I can find a healthy compromise where I can get what I want and be on your side. I don't think there because again, we see this now, Lady Luck. I we run across women who turn around and get degrees, multiple degrees, and either they become forever aunties, no aunties, or they become uh women who want kids and they waste a lot of their time and now they can't. Or or they are willing to give up everything they have to have that family when so much time has gone by, right? And it's like I think there's something that
That's
needs to be
true.
talked about in there, not the shaming, not the shitting on, but there's something that needs to be there for both sides. If you want to be a woman who wants to have family and kid, then you need to be more cognizant of, and you need to be honestly do a lot more deeper thinking. I'm not saying don't become the career woman, whatever. This is the day that you're going to be in. But I'm also going to say, don't hinder yourself in believing that you need to try to get it all. I think there needs to be a healthy balance. And you understand that you can't have it all. You cannot be the perfect wife. You cannot be the perfect mother and still be a fucking boss babe. You can't. Because for some reason,
We can't
women are told that,
because
yeah,
women also have body clocks and we have a certain amount of time in our lives where we can bear children, and if you
right.
leave it too late, you miss that.
Well,
The alarm goes off.
I think there needs to be a really, I don't know if it needs to be a class or psychologist or whatever, but there's something that needs to be taught because when we hear the word you can have it all, there's this idea that men have it all and we don't. Men because how can you say that men have it all when men continuously make sacrifices. The idea of sacrifices mean that something was lost. So if
Well,
something was lost,
I don't
how
think,
can you
I
have
don't
it
think
all?
men had it all. I don't think men had it all in the 50s, to be honest.
I but that's not the way it's sold to women. They again, we'll go back to you. Anything I can do, anything you can do, I can do better. Cool. Do you understand what he had to sacrifice to just be good at that one thing? I don't know. I was thinking about actually. This was a funny conversation because I was thinking about the conversation, the debate that was happening between Fatty and Mel, and they kind of got into this whole thing about the workforce when it came to women, right? And there was the conversation about the glass ceiling. And the same way how I talk when I talk and I say, in order to talk about having the conversation with men, I mean with women, we need to first have the conversation with men, guys. Get the room clean first, and then we can come to the table. But the same thing I have to say to women. Do not talk about the glass ceiling if you cannot talk about the glass cellar. How you want to be respected to be in 50 of the representing in 50% of what's going on in the world if you're not willing to be represented in 50% of the workforce. I need to see female bricklayers. I need to see female plumbers. I need to see female fucking grave diggers. How do you want the respect of those to say that you want to be at some of the most top areas in leading if you're not being represented of the people who are doing the hard work that actually helps keep society floating?
I
That's just my
agree.
thing. But when I
I
say that, it
absolutely
feels
agree.
nasty to women. I don't want to do that. No, Fatty said something that I laughed about, but he's not lying. It's just so funny that in all of human history, women want to start fighting for being equal only when birth control and air conditioning came into place. And I went, oh fuck. It never crossed my mind. When he said that shit, I said, oh, get the fuck out of here.
That rings,
It's
that rings true, doesn't it?
yo, I laughed, but I was like, I can't say shit. That's really when it came. It wasn't when everybody was dying of heat. Everybody had to deal with extreme cold. Everybody had to worry about chopping wood. Everybody had to worry about the midst of the steam engine. Whatever. It happened when life became the most comfortable at this time. And to say that you
That's
want to
it.
be represented as half after a good portion of civilization became a thing, you want half. And the conversation that I'm trying to remember the conversation, but when the thing came up and say, I think Fatty asked, what job what are women doing that if they disappeared, let's just say Thanos snapped, they were gone, that men couldn't do, the only thing that can pop up was basically having kids. Let's just say like now I would pose it
I
differently.
can see that. I can
Yeah.
see why that is the case. Yes, I
Okay.
agree.
But
Sorry,
I can also
ladies in the chat, but I agree.
yeah, I can also say this. Let's just say we don't have to Thanos snap and take all the women off the planet. I would pose that same question to say if there was a chemical biological chemical weapon, same thing that swept across across the globe like when we had COVID, right? And now everybody was sterile. What job would they be? Can you still answer that question if everybody is sterile now? Now we just got to go through the rest of our days with whatever population we have left. Could you really say being a mother? So I have to agree. Statistics actually shows that men, as much as there are very few single fathers compared to being single mothers, fathers have done a phenomenal job of getting their kids raised. So this idea of nurturing thing is kind of out there crazy because the same way how we talk about nurturing is the same argument that I hear for a lot of women talking about being romantic. When the truth of the matter is that men have been the romantics. Men are the ones who are laying down their coats. Men are the ones who are putting out the freaking safety. Men are the ones that are walking them home. Men are the ones that have to open the car doors. Men have the one that open the doors for walking in and out the restaurant. But where does the romance go? Maybe as a woman, can you tell me where does the romance fall in when it comes to women compared to men?
Well, I think it should have always been equal. I expect you to open a car door for me, you should be able to expect me to do it too.
Yeah, but that's not what's considered romance. I think men don't expect women to open car doors for them because
No, they
I don't
don't.
I would say I don't know any woman who was being romantic, who this on this idea of chivalry, who has ever held the door open for me. Friends just open the doors open so it don't slam in my fucking face because I'm with them, not because they were being chivalrous. Even a woman who's driven me has never opened a car door for me. Never that I've been the person who expected. So, what exactly do women do, which is considered romantic in comparisons to men, is what I'm wondering. Because even when I was a person who was romantic, I'm not as romantic as I used to be. What exactly would that be? Because I think men do the majority of the work. So when women say we're romantics, well, what is that exactly?
Is that watching romantic comedy movies? Is that making a romantic dinner? Is that what they mean? Because personally, I'm not a romantic person myself.
And again, it's not. I'm not bringing it up to quote shit on women. I'm asking if you're stating these things about that you want, right, and these things that you are. Could you give me an example? It's a thought exercise. If women are saying like, "I am this," could you provide me an example instead of you just saying that you are? What exactly do women do? Because I can think about all the things that women would like men to do, and the things that men have asked women to do are not a part of being romantic. I mean, outside I would say of wearing lingerie, I think we consider that to be romantic. But the idea of anything else is like, eh, eh.
Yeah. Well, if there's any ladies in the chat that can come up with something that women do that's romantic, Resla can drop the StreamYard link and you can come up and let him know, because off the top of my head, I can't. Besides the example that Resla's given, I can't uh, think of anything.
I mean, feel free. Like, listen, I'm just having that conversation. Lady, let's give her own perspective. If you have your own, there goes the link. Feel free to come up and take a look. Give your own perspective. I'm simply asking questions. I have not stated that people can't do this or that there's no way, there's no examples. I'm just saying if you have one, could you please give it? Because I'm unsure. Hey, Sky.
See, as far as women go and men go in physical abilities, I believe that women will never match men in physical abilities. So women playing sports that men play, I don't go for that, because I just don't think it's, when you're
Okay.
watching like a man's rugby game and women playing rugby, it's
Hmm?
not the same. Women cannot play sports that men. Sorry, ladies, once again, not a feminist. Um, sorry, but
No, that's true though. That's true. 100%. Women
it is
can't.
true.
Yeah, we can't. I don't want a man, if I'm swimming in competitive sports, I don't want a man against me, because we have different bodies. So we have different strengths and weaknesses. So let's just stay in our lane.
Well, Sky, are you gonna tell me that if we made an intersex league, not what's going on now, what you ladies got to deal with the
Yeah,
LGBTQ
yeah,
community,
yeah.
but I mean, if there was an actual league, say there was a 10-person team, 5 men, 5 women.
Oh, that's
Let's
fine.
let's just
Yeah,
say
yeah,
let's just say
yeah.
soccer
Let's
or
go for
rugby,
it.
whatever. Are you saying that you wouldn't want to show your skills and show that you
No,
were
no,
you were
I'm
the top
saying
dog in that team?
and that and that
No,
exact
I'm
scenario,
sitting on the bench.
right? No, in that scenario, I will absolutely give it a bash. Now, if I get fucked, that's just yeah, that's just pure sportsmanship. That's me. I'm out the door. But in that scenario, yes, I would compete. I would definitely compete. If there's 5 on 5, that's fair game. Honestly, men and women, I believe, not in strength, but in just in life, we're equal. We're not equal in many ways, but in life, if you're my husband or partner, I'm going to lift you up. I'm not going to bring you down. So we're going to, if you're having a shit time and you've got no money and I've got money, I'm going to raise you up and vice versa.
So, so the porch session, he said they can never complain with their decisions, right? But that's absolutely false because we see the complaints about their decision at all. I mean, let's just be honest. Let's be honest. We, as what I see in men's sports, right? What I see
Yeah.
in men's sports, hey Ditto. So let me change the layout for everybody. So what I see in men's sports, men are not sitting here complaining that there are transgender men coming in and trying to dominate their sports. This is an issue that's only
Okay.
happening with women.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we in fact we would just say, go ahead, give it your best, give it your best. Don't, but
No.
once you're in, you can't complain about you being a woman when you getting dunked on the head, when you getting
Yeah,
teabagged or whatever else. You can't complain.
exactly.
When you get that good shoulder check,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you get the stiff arm, you can't
Yeah.
complain. You can't do it.
Yeah. So
If you
guys,
run into my
right?
league as a transgender woman, all bets are off. Just because you managed to get yourself a goatee too, I'm dunking hard on you. I'm
Yeah,
breaking your neck to wall.
exactly.
I'm doing all that. This is why I always say that, as much as you ladies are the most empathetic and accepting, they are complaining. So, when we
Yeah,
hear that
yeah.
you can never complain about your decision, that's exactly what's happening because men
Yeah.
are not dealing with these issues.
So can I ask a very serious question, right?
Sure.
What do men think about men who are getting into sports, right? And using their feminine, I don't even know what to call it without sounding offensive,
Listen, say
but
what you gotta
they're
say.
using their feminine advantage card, right, to play in sports. So what do you genuinely think about that? Because to me, when I was in that world, we were, you know, if a man beat me at swimming, he was better than me. Full stop. He was better than me. But if you bring it into Olympic sport, right, where a man then sarcastically transitions into a woman to play a sport, and the whole world in the sporting industry is supporting that. I'm like, what the fuck? That's not right. I don't want to play against somebody when there's. Now, we'll take the Olympics this year, right? And we'll take the really disadvantaged Olympics. And we had a man dressing as. No, sorry, I'll be really factually correct here. So we had a person that used to have a bob bag and he's now got it tucked up, right? And he's got everything about him that's normal. And he's in the fucking Olympics for disabled. For disabled, by the way, right? They've got no arms, they've got no legs, and they're fucking blind. And they've got some excuse me, they've got some she that's got their ball bag tucked up and they're racing all over the place. What the fuck? That's ridiculous. Oh my god, it's
Even,
ridiculous.
but getting back to it, Sky, we're talking about the 50s, and um, women in the 50s weren't allowed to play a lot of sports that women can play today. So that's
Oh
one of the
yes,
comparisons that Resla was doing.
yes. Sorry, I didn't know that was the topic, but that's yes. Because when I was in school, it wasn't in the 50s, but when I was in school, girls didn't play football, they didn't play cricket, they didn't play a lot of sports, but I'm tiny. I'm really small. I'm only 4'11". So I'm a little silent ninja. You know, when you get out and like you're out there and like, who the fuck's that? She's vaulting over those
Came out of
bloody
nowhere.
yeah. But that's the thing, is that we want to make out, right, that we are kind of traditional and we're, oh my god, poor me woman. We're fucking not. I'm out there, I'm fending for myself, I'm, what the fuck? Why are we having this ridiculous talk and argument about things that happened decades ago? It's ridiculous. Let's pivot right now and concentrate on the here and now. There's things going on, and it's just, let's
Well,
not, let's,
well, that's the whole point of we're having this conversation because people are focusing on the here and now. And now I think when it comes to both the dynamics of men and women, we're focusing on the here and now. And men are
yeah.
saying that right now it was better then. And women are saying right now it's better now because back then sucked for us. It's a matter of perspective that's
Oh,
not
okay,
being
right,
seen.
okay, I've got that, okay. Oh, no, 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 I don't agree. I think, like, if I go back 20 years ago when I was with my husband, life was much better than what it is now. So I will agree with men there. I will. Honestly. It's not. I see in Edinburgh, right? If you go out to get a bag of chips, you're just going for a bag of chips. Like simple shit, right? And you've got girls out there, and oh, it's ridiculous. Lucky I've talked to you about this privately in your channel, but girls are going out in bikinis. They're dressed like they're going to the fucking beach, upside down bikinis, and you're like, what the fuck? I'm only
So,
going for a bag of chips.
so
It's
Sky, do you think it was easier for men in the 50s?
easier.
Yeah, do you think life was easier for them,
Well, I
or do you think,
think that
or
they
do you think
had.
they had a lot more? Do you think they had a lot more gender-based roles and more
Yeah,
pressure
yeah,
on
and
them?
I think also they had that gender-based, like, real pressure to be the provider, whereas nowadays I'm I'm a real traditional woman. So when my man comes home from work, I work from home and I have done for years, right? So if I'm
Mm.
with a man, when he comes home, right, and he's been out all day, I don't fucking care what you've been doing. Emptying bins, white collar in the bank, I don't fucking care. But if you've been out all day, right, and I've been home, and I've worked from home for 30 years. So I'm a old school work from home, right? I know how it all works.
Mm.
And if my man's out there, and I'll go back a tiny bit here, right? I originally started working from home because in Scotland, the money that it costs to send a child to daycare was ridiculous. And I was like, fuck you, I'm not paying that. Every day, my daughter's crying, I'm crying, I'm not happy. So we kind of pivoted a little bit and we readjusted. So I was like, no, actually, I'll stay at home. I don't mind doing this because it's genuinely what I want. But every bloody day that I done it because I was supporting our lifestyle, my husband, the whole shebang. It was, if my husband had no money, I'd go and work in a chippy or I'd go and get a low level job until we became self employed. And then
Gotcha.
when we did that, it kind of like, it changed things, not necessarily for the better, but it gave me the opportunity to stay at home so that when my husband was out there working, and my daughter come home from school, she come in the door, I'd make her a wee sandwich, and then my husband come home, the bath was run. Here, darling, there's a wee whiskey. Get in the bath. I'll cook
Whiskey.
your,
Damn.
yeah, I'll cook
So
your dinner.
so
I'll go
Dan,
do the wifey things, but because honestly, I didn't feel I love it. I love being a good wife, and I love just whoever comes to my home, I'm cooking, I'm
you said
making you
something very
feel
interesting.
welcome.
You said something interesting, Sky, and I'm gonna get back to it. But Dan came
Okay,
in. He's been
sorry.
quiet. No, you're good. Dan came in. I want to know what your thoughts on what we're doing in the conversation so far. Let me know if you need anything.
I was listening to Sky and just getting my ideas or the points I wanted to shoot across, straighten out.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be simple. Was the 50s, the decade of the 50s, a better era? Under what standard are we trying to define it as a good era or a bad?
yeah,
Exactly. Well, for
It's
the
a
most part, for what I'm bringing up is that when it comes to people reminiscing about the 50s, they normally are
yeah,
talking about the relational dynamics of family and marriage.
okay.
yeah,
So number one, the decade of the 50s, you barely had a 4 year span after the end of the Second World War. Second, so the relation of family was heavily impacted by the return of thousands of, if not millions, of soldiers
yeah, yeah,
from
yeah,
fronts. So that in itself has several key points where we
yeah,
can dwell into. Second, by the 50s, the world's population was about 2.6 billion people. United States barely reaching about 150 million by the 50s.
yeah,
Obviously, in the United States, if we focus into that more, you had the full blown apartheid state of the Jim Crow era going on, which technically had grades of suspension because of the Second World War. Technically, that's a very high technical point there. But then throughout Latin America as well as Europe, here are by the 50s, you about a 49-year period where the Victorian era still had some grades of influence. Of course, that Victorian era of behavior, of patterns of behavior, of patterns of customs, etc., that it involved a lot. It involved a lot of the world in a very romantic perspective, played a big role alongside the conservative, traditional Christian Catholic impositions of
oh no, no, no,
world work.
Okay. So let me ask you something very specific. So I will ask you the question because I know how it sounds from a lot of people, in particular black sectors, who talk about who like to romanticize about the 50s. But as someone who comes from a different ethnicity of heritage,
yeah.
how do those particular cultures view the 50s in regards to family relations and economic prosperity?
Um, from the Latin American perspective, the 50s was seen as a dark era of reconstruction because many of the countries during the last few years of the war until the 50s were suffering civil wars. Example of that, you had the Costa Rican Civil War, you had the Venezuelan Civil War, you had the Mexican Civil War, you had the Colombian assassination of the presidential candidate in 48. So that time was viewed as a political, social, and economic dark turn for Latin America, fulfilling about 130 years after their independence. It also marked a moment where we saw the transformation of the United States to becoming even more interventionist in our issues. That was the starting point. So
Okay.
the
Right.
50s,
D, can I ask you a question, darling? So, where are you from and what ethnicity are you?
I'm from San Jose, Costa Rica, Central America, born there. I've lived throughout most of the continent or Western Hemisphere. And my ethnicity is Afro-Indigenous. I have a combination of indigenous and African descendant of slavery.
Okay,
In
darling, thank you. Honestly, I appreciate that because I hate the thought that it would only be, and I'm going to use something that might be a bit controversial,
Do it.
guys,
Do it.
but I don't like the idea of being on a panel anywhere discussing black issues with only white people. There's something fucking weird in that for me, where
Oh,
it's
yeah,
just
well,
like
I know he's
it's
not.
weird. It's weird.
I know he's not. So it's all right, and which is why. But again, the idea that I speak to are actually people who are black, because again, the conversation is not made specifically on black issues. Because I've heard white
Yeah,
people say
yeah,
this as well.
yeah.
I wish I had more perspective of people who were of Asian, um, but I just haven't been
Right.
able
Okay.
to really bring that in. So most of the people who I actually do have conversation with tend to be black, be like Latin, or tend to be white.
Yeah.
I really wish I can bring more in. It's just hard to find those areas.
Yeah.
And it could just be my algorithm. I try searching, but I just haven't found it yet. So if you happen to
Um,
be one of those people, or you manage to be those areas, let me know, because I would love to venture out and have
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
conversation with them.
Exactly. That's
But
the thing. It's
you
all
mentioned
about.
Wrestler,
something else, Sky. You also
Oh,
mentioned something
excuse
re-
else,
me.
Sky.
Sorry.
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 wrestler
Sorry, you
back chat.
I will look at the back chat. Okay. No problem. I appreciate you.
Okay,
Um,
thank you. Bye.
no problem. Thank you. So I will ask you this, Sky. You also mentioned the aspect of being a good wife. What
Right.
exactly does that mean to you, being a good wife for a spouse?
Being a good wife. Do you want me to give you examples?
Yes, madam. Because I
Right.
think
Okay.
when we have conversations and we talk about people who are being a good wife, I tend to hear men stating what's a good wife and then women stating what they do as a good wife, but I don't really necessarily hear a lot of it from outer perspective. So from your
Right.
own
Okay.
firsthand accounting,
So
especially across the pond, tell me, what do you think
yeah,
for
to
yourself as being a
me,
good wife?
being a good wife, right, is about the little things. It's about mostly respect and values. So when I wake up in the morning, right, and my husband's still in bed, and I get up and I go on the bloody running machine or whatever I'm doing, my mind is still on my husband. So I'm like, right, he's up in 2 hours. Get you run over and done with. Make him some scrambled eggs or whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Just when he gets up, that's my man. My whole focus is there. Now, I'm in Scotland, right? Or in England, whatever, in Britain, we call it Wurzel Gummidge head. So you've got all these different heads that you put on, right? So I've
Okay.
got this head that I put on as a wife, and my wife head is it's shown by actions of love. So when you come home from work and you've got fucking sore feet, I'm gonna set up a foot bath. If you've got a headache, I'm gonna run a bath and give you some food. So it's all these little tiny, tiny, tiny little things that show you I love you. But there's that other side of that is that I'm also not just the wife, I'm the mother. So my head, I'll get my husband's bath ready, but the children have to be fed and taken care of. So we'll do that. We'll do
Wait.
all
So,
that.
Sky, let me ask you a quick question. Uh,
Yeah?
so based on what the things that you're saying so far, because it's very heavily focused on your family, but also your husband. And I understand, and this is not to take away from any children you have, but
Okay.
would you state that based on the things that you said so far, would your husband be the center of your attention? It's easy question.
Um,
There's no bad answer.
No,
When you
no,
said the
sorry, I'm
center
thinking
of your
about it. Sorry,
okay.
I'm thinking about
So let me
it.
let me be hyperbolic with the question, and you can like
Right.
again. I'm being exaggeration with the.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you say he's the center of your world?
Actually, no. I'm just going to be
Well,
honest.
like I said, well,
No, no.
I'm not
The
crapping on
center
the fact
of
that you have
my
children.
world,
Like I said,
the center of my world is
yeah.
my child.
I
But
I said excluding the idea where you're talking about your child. Is he
all
the
right,
center
sorry.
of your
Hold
world?
on, sorry, I never
Yes,
heard
yes.
that. Right. So
Children will always come
outside,
first and foremost. We understand that, but I say if the child's like not really in the play, is he the center of your world?
yeah, yeah, yes.
Okay,
Actually,
cool.
sorry. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I wanted to know that because the comment that came up from Adam was that she's not understanding she's selfish, and I'm actually thinking she's rather selfish. Her attention goes to other people, so another person rather than
Okay.
just herself. So
Yeah,
that's what I was looking at.
yeah.
So I want to know if you're saying that
No,
she's selfish. I would
he's,
like to hear a little bit more context because it
yeah,
seemed like when she's getting up even in the morning ahead of her husband, even with stuff
yeah,
that she said even prior to it, a lot of her focus tends to be on her husband.
yeah,
She hasn't really mentioned herself more than her husband and her actual child.
yeah. And he's right in saying what he's saying,
Yeah.
but for context, it's outside my child. Now, my work is very important to me. I love my career, but my career never has ever come before my husband or my children. Never, never. Because I'm quite traditional. I will fight for whatever, the underdog. I'll fight for everybody. But when I shut my door and I come inside, my family, fuck that. It's everything. I don't fucking care about anything outside that. But I will support it if I believe in it. But don't, oh, it's a hard one. Don't mess with family. It's just, no, we're not doing that. We're not, we've spoken about this like males, right? We've got beautiful families, but there's these interceders that are, they're nefarious, they're nasty, and they're going to get in there and do things. And you can't ever, ever fight against that. It's insidious. It's not your marriage. It's not your loving relationship. It's not your fucking husband or wife. This is outside that. This is these people that go out there, excuse me, they go out there and they've just got a little bit of like nasty bastard in them where you know these people that you invite to dinner where you're like you sit down you're like I don't fucking like you. You're gonna ruin my fucking relationship because you're just bad. So those people, fuck them. Get them out your life. Let's not do that. Let's be proper loyal.
If I may, I've been listening to Sky in many ways. I want to propose and reel back into the point of conversation.
Yeah?
Was the 50s what was the 50s a good era? And based
And
on
so that's
the
something that Lady Luck is actually asking because she said, "Would you be?" She's asking Sky, "Would you be okay with going back to being a '50s woman, essentially, and all of the stuff that stuff encompassed?" But you were saying, Dan,
Oh my god!
if you
You
had to
put
go
me
back,
on the
if you
fucking
had the
spot.
choice, if you
Yeah,
had the choice,
lucky,
would you go back to
lucky,
being a
I'll
'50s
tell you the
woman?
truth, right? Yes, I would
Okay.
definitely go back to the 50s because I'm a trad wife. I am, honestly. Got a mouth on me, but I'm really traditional, so yes, I would.
Okay. So, Dan, what was your question? I'm sorry,
uh,
what you were saying?
yeah, actually, I'm gonna go simple on this, and there might be a difference of opinion with Sky in that sense. One, I'm gonna assert that no, the 50s were not a great era either in family values or in every indicator related to the life of people in there. Why? Well, the 50s is a technical lost decade where a those people who were given birth between late 40s and the 50s are
Oh,
the people who gave the life to the generation of the 60s. That's the first point. And the reaction of the 60s and the 70s was a complete and utter rejection to the so-called traditional values. And that tells us something. That tells us if the immediate children,
no, it doesn't. Because you're spouting things here without receipts. So bring up the data to prove, right, that during that period, life was better. It wasn't. Just like I was born in the 70s, right? And
Sky,
people look back and think, oh, it was so fucking great. No, it wasn't. So bring the receipts here to
okay,
show.
Sky. So far of what I said, what did you understand? Are you understanding, or are you assuming that I said that it was a great era, or are you understanding that I clearly said that it
Oh,
wasn't?
no, I'm understanding, darling. I'm not misunderstanding you at all. And I'm not dissing you. I'm not saying to you, I don't agree. What I'm saying to you is that we have we have absolutely different feelings now. The 50s were now ridiculously 70 years ago. So you can't actually compare that sociologically with today. It does not work.
I
It
haven't
doesn't. It
I haven't
doesn't work.
compared it to today. I apologize if that came across that way, but I wasn't. So fundamentally, what I'm telling is, in responding to the question, no, the 50s were not a great era, and those who romanticize that era without the historical, sociological analysis of that era, a
Yeah.
post-war era where the world economy was reconstructing, where
Yeah.
the positioning of the United States became after the war what it is today, where the generations
Hi, Yvette.
that were born in the late 40s and early 50s and were teenagers by the 60s clearly showed that the traditional constructions of relation between men and women and family was completely rejected by by the 60s and the 70s, which transformed a lot of the notions that were that then eventually lead to today, to
Okay. Yeah.
modernity. So what I'm telling, or what I'm trying to establish, and there's two actual receipts in regards to this analysis in the back
Okay.
chat as we speak. Um,
Okay.
it is fundamentally, if a person comes and says, well, the 50s were a better era, that is known as the fallacy of the golden age. It wasn't. Neither
Eh?
was it a worse era. It was an era marked by the
No.
historical
N-
events that were happening
No.
near to it at that moment.
Don't. No. 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 You're pivoting from the truth here. You're just no, absolutely not.
So, Dan, what exactly do you mean by that particular statement?
Uh, the statement of the 50s were not a great era, nor were there was it a terrible era. It was just an era marked by the events near and on that decade.
you do understand that the 50s were is an era that is the rather perspectives. Even if I mentioned
Yeah,
earlier, there were people who benefited very well from the 50s,
exactly.
whether they came from the war, so there was the GI Bill and everything else. People were
Yeah,
able to start building houses. We have veterans that were just now back. Also, that I mentioned that as much Black people want to say that there were so much big family dynamics, I also just say
yeah,
that there was also instabilities that people don't want to recognize. And when they start reminiscing about family dynamics in the 50s, like there was still heavily segregation. And that's why
exactly.
I also wanted to talk about
Mhm.
what was it like for other people, especially like of Latin descent, if I could, of people who were Indian, Native American, of people who were Asian, but I couldn't really find their perspectives on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
It
that's
wasn't
exactly.
great. It was so I will agree with you. I will concede the point. It wasn't great for everybody.
I'm
But the
fucking
same way how you
white
mentioned,
and
yeah,
I've got no
what was the
clue.
baby girl? We know this. But like Dan, like the point that you mentioned, like in Latin countries, there was a whole war and there was a whole thing with
Yeah.
presidents. Like these are things that other people don't realize because we get so locked in our own box. So, but
Yeah.
when I hear people recount the things that were quote the good old days, I'm like, stop cherry picking.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Stop.
no, obviously. We can agree on that
To-
sense. I
to-
mean, I think, and to give a more context to the point I was trying to make, that generated this, we have to recognize the historical realities that were happening at that era, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the horrendous of
okay.
that of those different events throughout the whole world. Of course, when I make the assertion that I can talk on this type of issue because I have studied it in depth, I'm not capping you in any way. Um, but if we make the analysis focus just in the United States,
Wait.
there are volumes of things that we can talk about. If we then head towards Europe, what
No.
was one of the hold on, Scott? What was one of the major concepts that was happening in Europe during that era? It's known as the Reconstruction era, the Marshall Plan. Europe was
Yeah.
licking its wounds after the Second World War, etc. If we
But
go to
how is that
Africa,
relevant? How is that relevant right now? Let's bring that into the 20 bloody first
The 21st century.
century.
So right,
Let's just
no,
right.
it's
honestly.
relevant in
Well,
the sense that we're
okay, go ahead.
just given the context of at least the major events that were affecting the different areas around the world, and
Which major
in a
events though?
Right,
List
because
the
when we're talking
events.
about that, right? Because when we're talking
Which
about that,
major
I'm trying to figure
events?
out how can we bring those what events or what things can we bring forth to say that these good old day tactics, how could that be relevant today in 2024 in the
Okay.
21st century? Because we're talking about things that happened in the 20th century.
Yeah, yeah.
How do those things relate and turn around to be things that we can utilize in the 21st?
Well, for me,
what,
it's absolutely fucking truth. Just here, let's speak. Let's say our truth. Be damned. That's it.
so if we look at it in a very simplistic way or a very direct way, one, it was on the 50s at the end of the war, and that process of post-war, that the US dollar became the world major reserve currency, that the US corporations assumed leading positions in many industries. And this is a period that we could call it the era of Reconstruction that lasted from 50 to 73, technically
Okay.
speaking. We can also see that, um, of course, uh, the startup of many of the processes of revolutions and of decolonization, particularly in Africa and in Asia, in some sense, during that period of the. Also see, for example, that Rosa Parks, her main activism happened in 57, 58. So basically, we start seeing that the post-war era in towards the relationships the groups of people in different countries was starting to manifest a continuous rebellion against the status quo that had been held for 50 years prior, from the start of the century up to the 50s. So
Eh?
that rebellion that on the decade after the 50s, on the 60s and the 70s. That rebellion marked an anti-traditionalist
Yeah, you can't
and
see my side eye right now,
Oh,
but
okay, okay. I'm hearing what you're saying that, but at the same time, I'm still wondering, like, how when it comes to that the question that being asked, how do men basically romanticize the 50s outlook? Like, how does it make them a happier lifestyle today? Like, that's what I'm trying to get down to, and I'm not understanding like the
okay,
context
hold
of
on.
everything else that you're
I,
giving me.
I just realized that I may be getting a bit confused in your question. What are you exactly asking of me in the analysis?
So, uh, so to the point that even Sky and I were asking, what would make men happier today? Would men be happier today with the quote 50s lifestyle, or does society actually offer more freedom for both genders today?
Okay, to answer the first part of the question, would men be happy with 50s style of relationship in marriage and in relationships? In my own position, no. I mean, there might be some men there who may enjoy uh, that grotesque form of control towards women that happened in the 50s. And to answer the second question, is there better equality in the relationships of individuals, regardless of the gender, towards the states and towards those in power?
The second part of the question is,
yeah,
does modern society actually offer more freedom to both genders today?
yes, it
I
Yeah,
think we
does.
and
can say yes.
Absolutely.
yes, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah,
It does offer more
absolutely.
in many ways.
So let me ask the second part of the question. Based on how we look at communities today versus how we look at back then, because
Yeah.
the question is
Hindsight.
that we were better in hindsight.
Yeah.
So looking at how we move today versus how back then, because we weren't none of us lived back then, but we can only look back based on history and what we've
It's
learned.
so much better today. Oh my God.
Let me ask the question because I want I want Dan's thoughts on this.
Okay,
Were
sorry.
no, you're good. Were communities actually closer? That's the key word, closer in the 50s, or does technology just make it feel like we have more of a disconnect today?
Oh, it
No,
was definitely closer. Definitely.
no, I would disagree. Communities in the 50s were
Okay.
not closer. And one fact
Not
sense that
closer. Did you say not closer, D?
no,
So what he so let me ask let me ask the question again because there's two parts in that. The first part is, were communities actually closer in the 50s? And then the second part is, does does communities does technology just make it feel like we're more closer, but we're actually more disconnected today?
um,
Oh no. For me, the disconnection is not on YouTube. I honestly, I've met so many beautiful people here that I connect with proper. So the disconnect is with the unbelievability of that conversation where I'm like, no, I'm out here. I'm
Okay,
just gone. I'm going to bed,
to
I'm
settle it
gone.
up, to settle that point, Sky, your statement is that we're more connected now than we ever been, like compared
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
50s.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so Dan, what is your thoughts on
yeah,
that?
in the same line of Sky, and to respond to your question, question one, were the communities closer in the 50s? The answer is no, and I remit myself to the historical events and issues that were happening during that era.
Okay,
communities more connected today, or have the capability of being more connected today
Yeah.
because
Okay.
of technology? Yes.
Yeah. We all agree. I love that. Oh my god.
So
How
okay, so I'll
amazing
give
is
my thoughts
this?
on that. I think
We
based
all
on
agree.
what was said about communities back then compared to now, I'm actually going to be in the mindset of saying that there were communities that were. I believe that they were actually. Well, does someone believe strong? Not, but I think that communities were closer back then in the 50s than they were
Okay.
now. And I'll give you. I'll tell you why. Because of, and I've kind of alluded to this in previous streams, but
Right.
back in the previous days, because there was no technology, people had to really work more on eyewitness testimonies or being more of a social engagement of a person to person contact.
Yeah.
People were interested in taking care of their neighbors by person to person contact. People could watch other people's kids through person to person contact.
Oh no, no,
People were
no.
more in the mindset of saying that I'm going to tell your parents if you act up, because there was a person to person communal aspect of what happened within the
Okay.
community. Versus
Yeah.
today, because of technology, we claim that we are closer to each other, but we're actually more distant than ever before, because despite the fact that the advent of technology, people are still reporting to be experiencing
What the fuck?
more loneliness than ever before. People are saying the fact that instead of just really hanging out, instead of really having the cocktail parties, instead of having the big group gatherings at homes, like how people did book clubs at homes, people did social gatherings, big
So
parties at home,
Resla, right?
compared to
Right
today,
now.
where now people, work Sky,
No,
people now
no.
today talking about, I can like your picture, I can see what's going on in your life, but I can say that I
What the
feel close to
fuck?
you. But then when you ask them when's the
This
last time they
is
actually
oh
laid
my
eyes
god.
on their friends, they're saying maybe in about a month or so. Are we really connected
Yeah,
today as
but
much
I
as we were in
don't.
the 50s?
Oh my god, I don't fucking jive like that. So, are you saying to me right now, in this moment, that every moment we've had, right? Honestly, I'm not being disrespectful here to anybody at all, right? So I'm saying to you right now that I'm in Scotland, right? You're out there in Chicago, and are we
No,
not
madam, I'm in New York
making?
City.
Oh, sorry, sorry. I got I got fucked up. Sorry,
I'm in the
but
Big Apple.
yeah, you're in a Big Apple. So are we not actively all joining the same community? Because I am. I'm honestly I'm connected to that, and anything outside I'm like fuck you. I'm just not. I don't. There's something that connects my brain to the people that when I've got my voice I want to speak to. I don't give a shit about the drama and the fuckwits. I just want to chat, and that it's not a biological
So
fact.
here's a great example of this guy.
Yeah,
You are now in an age, right, where you are able to utilize your voice and speak to people across vast distances, right? But
right.
I ask the question: how many people today in today's era speak more online than they do with actual friends? They have more people that they know and they speak to online than they
Oh,
actually
right,
do in real
okay.
life.
As a serious, if I was like doing a serious study, I would say there's probably 95% of people out there that are not. Actually, I'm going to be really subversive with my
Okay.
words here. There's 95% of people out there, they don't give a fuck. But I do. I genuinely do. So fuck them. I'm in my little corridor.
I hear what you're saying, but you're speaking anecdotally. When I say with people in general, I think there are more people now who speak more to people online than they do actually knowing a person to person contact. I
Yeah,
think
but
there are
that's
more
what I
people.
said,
Yeah,
Resla.
yeah.
That's what I said. Those people out there, I don't get it. They're out there, they're doing their shit.
Well,
Yeah,
that's the point, but that's the difference, guy. When I ask the question, are people basically are they closer in communities in the 50s compared to now? I would say yes. Now I know get that
yeah,
you
me
and
too.
Dan have
Yeah,
said no,
yeah,
but
yeah,
like the answer is like you had to get to know your neighbor.
yeah,
Like the idea of me
yeah,
saying like so there's a great distance. I have new neighbors that are moving in next door. It's a difference between saying knocking on the door and say, "Hey, what's up, neighbor? I'm so and so. If you need it, I can help you out. Here's my
yeah,
number."
yeah,
Compared to saying, "Hey, so and so, what's going on? Take down my IG. We can text from time to time in case there's packages that come to my door, and that's it." There's no actual communication prior
yeah,
to
yeah,
because it's looked at as
yeah.
weird. Here's a great example as well between friends, Sky. How many people text each other consistently but won't call each other to hear each other's voice?
Oh,
Why are you calling me?
Resla,
That's
listen.
weird. That's weird.
Resla,
You're
listen.
a creep for
I'm the
calling me.
same age as you, right? And my daughter is 36 and she's like, Mum, nobody ever speaks on the phone. They don't speak on the phone.
It's
And do you
crazy.
know and do you know those little voice things? I don't do them because see me, I'll say to my daughter, listen, babes, I love you, but fucking speak to me. I'm not doing it. I'm not. I'm not. I have never been on social media. So when she sends me those little, honestly, Resla, if you could see my hands right now, right? My fingers are like getting narrower, and I'm like, my daughter is so. She works for a bank, right? And she is an analyst. So she's very smart. But she'll look at me and she's like, Mum, fuck off. You're talking shit. You don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, no. We have to back up a bit because everybody has a right to express their opinion. And she's like, no, that's not true. Mum, whatever you say, she's like, you'll put it out there, it does not matter. People will do what they're gonna do. Oh, actually, she's right. She's right.
To an extent. To an extent.
They're gonna do what they're gonna do. And there's a part of me that wants to step up and say, don't speak like that. That's ridiculous. I don't believe. Why don't you believe? But there's another part of me that says, go out there, do your thing, and actually, if I'm wrong, I promise you, I'll put my hand up and I'll say I'm sorry.
There you go. So let me ask Dan, based on the way how I just pretty much laid the groundwork, and I think that Sky's turned around and actually agreed with my assessment based on what I said. Do you
Yeah,
still
yeah,
think that we are still more connected in the 50s?
Yes, for various
yeah.
reasons. One,
Okay.
the argument in regards of the connection happening back in 70 some odd years ago has to take into account the factual essence of what was the population at that time. The United States, for example, had 151 million people starting on the decade of the 50s. Um, and we see that the idea of criticizing the interrelationship of individuals based on the
Wait. I
event.
want to interject real quick. The number of people doesn't necessarily factor out the fact of the aspect of how many people or the percentage of people that were actually or were very
Exactly.
communal with each other. That's my thing.
Yeah.
So again, let me bring it back in
Be
that sense.
Yeah. Go
precise.
ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
One, if we are going to make a criticism in regards of the interrelationships between people because of
Yeah.
the advancement of technology, and make the case that back in the 50s, due to the condition that there were fewer populations, therefore it was an easier form of relation between communities, but it also presented a challenge of isolation, especially if you look at into how countries were organized and the clear line between urban and rural populations that
Yeah.
not only segregated but isolated themselves from each other. So, fact of the matter is that if we are looking to
Oh
say,
my God.
okay, because of the way that technology related to the capability of communicating to each other was minimal in the 50s, and in the last
Yeah.
74 years has incremented and changed that relation between people, does not indicate or does not show if there was
Yeah.
higher or lower connection. It only
Yeah.
shows how habits have transformed throughout those 74
I
years.
tell you what, Dee, right? Can I interrupt and ask you, can you like send that out to everybody? Because we'd actually like to understand what you're talking about and doing. So I'd like,
So go ahead. Go ahead. Finish up. Finish up, Sky.
oh, sorry.
No, no.
I'd
Finish up.
like to understand what you're talking about and get involved because we're all from the same community. So we're all talking about the same thing. And why aren't we all communicating together and uniting? I don't understand, D, where you're
So
coming from.
so I understand. I understand the difference in what he's making, and he makes a point when he mentions like suburbs versus cities. I get it. But
Right.
but the point that I asked in the first part of that question was
Mhm.
communities actually closer. And even if you
Okay.
mention the suburbs and quote the technology that's being used today,
Yeah.
even the people who are in the suburbs can now connect with multiple people via technology.
Yeah.
The idea is that communities are there actually closer in the 50s than there are now. Because I mean, unless you bring yourself to like, I don't know, be in the gaming community or furry
Yeah,
community
but
or
I
whatever,
wasn't
like,
bloody
are we saying that they are
alive.
closer?
I wasn't alive in the 50s.
Well, well,
That's
well, well,
ridiculous.
neither of none of us were, but
None of us.
we can take a look back for what we do know from what we have learned, and then just try to ask the question. And I get what he's saying. I get
I
what he's
was
saying.
I wasn't alive in the 50s, but my mama was. So my relation to understanding how one individual, my mother, lived the 50s is the starting point to
Yeah,
then
but
go
oh my
into the
god.
whole. Hold on, Sky. I want to make this point very clear.
Mhm.
Okay.
One, based on the historical events, major and minor, that were happening throughout the whole world and that impacted in different ways the different regions of this particular world, I do not consider that there was major connection between communities. There was an illusion of connection, but that illusion was subjected to the necessities or the or uh, the economic uh, the economic necessities at that moment. So, do I consider that
D,
the
no,
investment?
back up. Back up. Honestly. I'm not jiving.
Easy now. Easy, Scott. Easy.
Is this guy?
Let us know if you're good. So for me, I don't know. Like I said, I to my point when it comes to the both those dynamics of time, I don't know. I just see that there was more of an understanding and communal aspect just because people were more. Let's be honest. Just when it comes to human beings, person to person contact is more effective and more relatable, and draws out even more endorphins than people who are sitting online. That's just the way how I know human beings to be. We have plenty of studies that show that. So the idea that even though people can try to develop relationships online, trust happens more quickly, more effectively with people who have a peer-to-peer contact. That's just the way
So
how I look at it.
let me ask you a question in regards
Sure,
to this, and perhaps we can work
sure.
on this point. Um, how did the intercommunitary relationships in the
Yeah.
50s fueled what happened in the 60s in just the case of the United States, for example, the civil rights movement? Was that a something that emanated from the grassroots, from the bottom up, and the relation between communities that then transformed into
Eh?
what it
I
was?
I'm lost, sister.
No,
Okay,
that's
so
Wait, you're gonna
ridiculous.
have to break that
I'm
down
fucking
as to how is
yeah,
lost.
that
okay,
built between actual being for people actually bonding together in communications.
okay. So
Yeah.
let me grab your base argument. The base argument
Okay.
is from you that on the 50s, due to the conditions of that era, the relation of communities was better than what it is today. And partially, if I'm understanding correctly, you are
Communities form closer bonds in
Yeah.
the 50s than they do today, even
okay.
with technology.
So the question in regards of that particular argument would be: did the creation of those bonds between communities, in the case of the United States and in the case of Black communities, did those bonds function as the fuel to then what we saw of the civil rights movement? Did those communities, because of those bonds that were created, said to themselves, "We're getting fucked. We got to stand up and we got to do something for ourselves"?
Wait. Are you telling me that when people rallied, when they did everything in as far as the civil rights movement, that there were not closer bonds than say those who had took place in BLM? They were absolutely much closer during the civil rights movement than the freaking capitulation that we saw that was taking place in just most recent times. They were absolutely closer in
Okay.
communities. Absolutely.
QED,
Exactly.
QED, my friend.
Hey,
So again, QED in the sense that the point I was making in this whole conversation is that one, communities were not closer in the 50s
Oh
much
my
more than they were today. That the bonds in the last
no,
74 years,
no,
hold on,
that's
Sky, Sky,
let,
give me a
ridiculous.
let,
moment
let,
to,
let me
No,
make a point. I want to hear him
don't
out.
ask
yeah,
me
okay,
to hold on. I've been fucking silent for about 15
sure you
minutes.
have. Yes.
Yes, I have.
I hope you're better from your
See,
cough.
no, that's ridiculous.
So
So explain why it's ridiculous.
What, my point of view?
Yes.
Yeah, well, no, actually, wait a
Hmm.
now. You just asked me to stand on my point of view for his ridiculousness. No,
Well,
it's not
if you're
fucking happening.
if you're
No,
stating that what he said is ridiculous, I would like you to articulate and explain why it's ridiculous.
it's ridiculous because his generalization about this point, I'm not buying it. I'm not. Fuck off. Ridiculous. End of.
Well, you are aware that he's entitled to have that particular perspective. I
Oh
would just
yeah,
like to know.
he
No, no.
is.
I
Yeah,
would just like to know
absolutely.
how it varies from what I just stated earlier. When people have, because the idea, I'll just even say it this way. It was much later in time, but I'll even say it this way: the idea that we can turn, no, not a drunk panel, crab, but the ideal that that's like saying that the people who had to turn around with no advent of technology, that they weren't
Okay.
closer, say, let's just say during the Million Man March, that there would that
Yeah.
the idea of building those communities were not as effective, not as close as how they are today. That would be wildly insane. Like, what are we
Yes, it
saying
would.
here?
Yeah.
So
Because
again, just to
I'm
make
not
that
buying
point
it.
across.
That's ridiculous. I'm not.
So to make the point across,
Oh my god.
Go on.
one, my criticism in regards of inter-community relationships at the 50s and the nearness or the capability of bonding as a particular as in a particular sense, saying it was better then than it was now, it actually showed that it was not so with your own example of the
The
BLM.
question, we're messing it up. The question is not about better. Closer was the word.
Okay, so even if we take the word closer, the point that I'm trying to set across is that not necessarily. That the closeness of and the contribution of technology in this type of bonding and closeness of communities has only helped in making it more effective of those bonds to be created in different fashions. In the
I don't see that.
50s,
But go ahead, go explain, because I don't
but
see that.
you did see that through the BLM situation.
No, I don't. There was so much division that was already taking place in that. Is not, I don't think it was nearly as effective of, say, like I'll just say again, like the Million Man March. I don't think it was nearly as effective.
Okay, so let's go back in the 50s. And let's go back, I don't know. Let's make
I
examples.
think there were more communities. There was more cohesion. There was more closeness during the time that we had to
Exactly.
deal with riots and we had to deal with formations than worrying about the collection of. And I'll just say it because I'm not a fan of George Floyd. Than that one man and how we represent people who should
Yeah.
not have been in a particular position who were also had their own records, which I'm not even getting into. I will still say there was much more cohesion. There was much more collectiveness. There was much more solidarity with those particular movements than freaking BLM.
Okay,
Given the
so
lack of technology, the lack of.
uh, so what is interesting in that sense is that the argument goes towards the attitude of those who were in the 50s, in their 20s, 30s, with families, mm, versus those of those who were back 8 years ago, in the 16, 15, on the George Floyd BLM situation. Is that how I should understand that criticism that you're providing forward?
Well, it's not a matter of criticism, despite the fact that they had to literally go grassroots on the floor. Lack of technology was able to pull in those kind of numbers compared to, let's just say, just even if we want to turn around and just look at the LA riots, right?
Yeah.
We can turn around and say that there was
Exactly.
way bigger of a turnout for that than what we can say in today's era of George Floyd when the riots took place. There was still a bigger movement that took place. There was
Yeah.
still there was still way more solidarity for that time period
Okay,
despite the
the
lack
point
of technology.
the point I want to make without beating around too much around the
Yeah,
bush is
sure.
that the cohesion that you're talking about, in if we just go directly into the history of the civil rights movement and the appearance of that civil rights movement, with examples of Martin Luther King versus the positions of Malcolm X, it showed to us that even if there was a direct notion of we have to solve the apartheid state and we have to reclaim for our rights, the ways of doing it were different and differed from each other. So Was that cohesion or that perceived cohesion back in that era an illusion or a fact that we can prove throughout the whole sense of movement, or that the societal cohesion and the bonding of communities is also relative to the response and to the accessibility of technology, as well as to attitudes such as solidarity.
Even if we mention in the factors of technology today, I just need to put it down. Do you think, yeah, you're really telling me that there was a stronger bond? Because that's really what I keep mentioning, closeness of communities. Do you believe that there was a stronger bond when it came to BLM than the freaking riots, than it came to the civil rights movement? There's a bigger bond for the BLM movement than it was for the civil rights movement, based on technology alone.
No, not
You really feel
necessarily.
that
What I'm
this
telling
was
you,
stronger?
is that we have to be careful on how we establish that notion of strength or stronger, because the
Well,
those
that's what when I say
capabilities.
stronger. When I say stronger, I'm talking about literally the closeness of communities
Okay,
bonding together for a cause.
so in the era of the civil rights, especially in particular because we're talking right after the decade of that of ending the Second World War, the notion of the people who mobilized in the ages of 20s, well, teenagers, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, people that were born in from the beginning of last century to to be an adult in the 50s, versus and how those actions on that during those 50s reacted versus of what has happened afterwards in different moments of the historical sense. I would not say that they were stronger or weaker. I would say they responded to those involved in those actions that gave the illusion of a stronger cohesion, but that illusion was based on their capabilities of action, their capabilities of making decisions, and of making real effective actions in the real world.
So I'm hearing what you're saying, but then you also mention yourself. You're saying the illusion. Will you say that again for the people who were doing, say, the civil rights? I'll even go to the LA riots. This is something more a little more closer, but you can go all the way to the civil rights movement. Was there an illusion when it came to what they wanted versus what we see today? What we see in this era? I would say there's a stark difference in the behavior. There's more of a stronger belief in those eras, which means that they had a stronger bond. They were more closer in communities. I'm trying to get like where is it that in today's era where people are just really as disconnected, not as close in the form of the internet and how we bond with each other. I'm trying to understand why communities that we would consider the online community, where which pretty much we see more deceitfulness than actual bonds, to be honest with you, that will be a stronger bond, because now we're like, even if we go to the social behavior, the social construction of how people react with one another, but that essentially opens up a line to say that people connect more online than an actual peer-to-peer communication. And that would go against all scientific information or psychological studies that show that, like, even like, I'm sorry, you can give me an air hug all you want, the touch, the actual closeness, the actual feeling of someone, the endorphins will weigh more from someone who's a peer to peer than being online. And the idea of meeting someone, even if, say, you want to be in Mississippi all the way to freaking Oregon to meet somebody who has the same actual ideals and the actual same bonding and the actual same cause as you, is way more bonding than someone who just says that they do so online. I'm
I
trying to
under,
understand.
I understand the point or the base that you're trying to make, and I'm going to make the following case. One, the vision of world 74 years ago had expanded because of the World War. Because suddenly the people came to realization that shit, this world is bigger and we got issues, real fucking issues that are affecting us in every sense of the word. Once that era or once that post war came in, those who remained it not only had to face the Reconstruction era, but had to face it in societies that had lost its identity because of the war, or had been affected very much on those identities by the war, of
Mm,
what it is to be free, what it is to be, what is to fight for that freedom, what it
mm.
is to care for the fellow neighbor, etc. So I would say that the capabilities of bonding, solidarity, and the capabilities of those communities responding to their particular realities at that moment have to do with the the impacts of that World War II. When I talk about the illusion, I'm talking about the notion that we have to be extremely careful. The underlying notion of thinking that those attitudes were hegemonic or were monolithic in many ways, which they weren't. They, as us and the generations in between of those
Mhm.
74 years, have shown that the curse of actions and the curse of communities standing up for
Correct.
their own needs is as diverse as there are people involved in that. And then we see the usual game of one voice saying no, we have to do this, and another voice saying we can do it this other way, etc. And then we start seeing that diversification of it. So I think that the major issue that we can have with the positioning of romanticizing the past is understanding that the fallacy of golden age is derived uniquely and specifically by that feeling of the past was better when it wasn't.
I'm we're not in disagreement with that. I am in the same mindset of saying that the past was not better. I understand that even today there are people who romanticize about a time that they have no inclination about, but will still try to push forward for that kind of thing. But I will also say that communities themselves were absolutely stronger than they are today. Because even to the point that you're stating, for people who are, and I think part of the reason why we're also can state that communities are stronger before rather than today is because too many people, especially due to technology, have too many options, which granted too many opinions.
And
People
what
are
I would
most likely to be all over the place when they have too many things that they can actually state as being a difference, rather than if you're only given the choice of Coke or Pepsi, you only have those two things. But if you're given 42 different flavors, you're gonna almost end up with 42 different opinions.
and
And technology grants that.
what I would say to that is that even with what technology enables us to do,
Mhm.
the base fundaments of that cohesion and that response that was in the 50s is still today within communities. That we can possibly agree and come to the agreement that it has the appearance of being more dispersed than what could have given that appearance back 74 years ago. But that
Wait,
dispersion is could just be a response to the easiness of communication nowadays, but does not refer to that in the necessity of that cohesion. Be it, I'll give you one best example of showing that cohesion. When we're hit with a natural disaster, we've seen the communities whoop, and that cohesion happening and technology working in favor of that cohesion systematically.
Have we?
Yes. Well, at least outside of the United States, I have seen that
Oh.
in more occasion. But when I went to help in the Katrina as part of first rescuers from Costa Rica, I also saw that in St. Louis, in Louisiana. I'm sorry, um, and I saw that reaction happening on the ground. That the people were coming together, and on the moment of truth, that cohesion was pretty much present. It was the same that it was back in the 50s or in the 60s or in the
I
era of
don't know about that
independence.
because even when Uncle Fatty puts up everybody floats, the first thing I was thinking of prior to his comment was looking at Louisiana with all the freaking mausoleums and bodies floating in the freaking river, and how late our government responded to a whole bunch of shit, and how people
No, no,
couldn't be able to help, and how the Red Cross wasn't doing too well or whatever. I thought about
the,
all that different stuff. Not to mention the fact that there are plenty of people who I think they have less empathy today than they ever did ever in the past, which is why I'm wholeheartedly on the idea. And when I said that technology just grants too many opinions, is because people have so many options now that there are so many people who are not willing to get on the bandwagon. I think there are. I'll even say, due to the advent of technology, there are people who are less patriotic today that we can see all over, even when it comes to our college campuses, than ever before, because quite frankly, people are given too many options and too many opinions to give their actual assessment of what they think they want for the world, not what they actually know of the current world states. So no, I will still go back and saying that I believe that, based on the fact that there were very limited choices, and because, and I'll even say this in terms of how we mentioned BLM, right? Part of the reason why that particular organization could not be able to have a strong backing by, quote, its own Black communities, because Black people have not been able to have a strong, centered message as to what they want, which is why someone like the LGBTQ community can come in and have a singular message and get what they want. How people who have been here as and have as less numbers than black communities, the Asian community can turn around and get a whole freaking bill passed, but Black people have been here for hundreds of years and can't seem to get together on one single message. So when I say that you have too many things that too many people want to complain about, and you can't get in on a single solitary message, it's because there's too many opportunities, there's too many things to complain about rather than getting on one thing. When it came to that time of, say, the LA riots or getting into freaking the Silver Age era, there weren't that many things to have to focus on because everybody was able to band under a particular message itself. And that's why I say, with the advent of technology, communities are not as close as they used to be. And I'll even go on to what Lady Luck said, is that we have become more disconnected than ever before. Because quite frankly, technology has only promoted us to be the worst parts of ourselves, not necessarily the most best parts of ourselves.
so
Yeah,
in
we've
that
been more
sense,
distant every time. We see it in our
I,
politics. We see it in communities. We see it. There are less people volunteering than ever before. We see it all over the board.
well, I mean, let's face it, back in the 50s, late 40s, we were exiting the Second World War. So even without technology, we showed ourselves to the worst parts of ourselves. So,
Hey,
I
hey,
mean,
there were more supports for veterans then than there are now.
but in the same sense, United States
Why?
dropped
Because
two
veterans were part
atomic
of their
bombs.
community. Now, in fact,
Okay,
just here in New York, only as of last year, we finally got veteran homelessness, just veterans themselves, down to 1% compared to how
okay.
skyrocketed it
So,
was before, because they're not
I,
even viewed the same way. Because why? We didn't treat vets that way in this country, because there was more of a communal aspect and more empathy for those who served our country. That's not the same way now.
look, in that sense, in the question of VA, I'm the least ideal to talk in regard to that because you know that in my country we abolished military, so we don't see serving in military as something honorable. We see it as something troublesome. But that's a different
Anyone
story.
who's willing to lay down their lives. I mean, it depends on how you look at your government. If you don't, if you see
Yeah,
the,
and
if you
and I
see the,
wanted to.
if you see your military as a peacekeeping force, sure. Not every country has that, so I get it. Not everybody sees their military as that. That's all.
So I wanted to address that point.
Sure.
You mentioned something that we have to make a clear distinction
Okay.
when we're referring and talking about the social cohesion. Do we? Is it best to make a distinction between the obligation of those elected, aka government, versus those who are civil, who are the civil society, non-elected, but are the people, we the people, in
Okay.
that sense? Do we make that distinction? It is my clear position that yes, we make that distinction
I
in
agree.
regard of the essences of how we do it. So
I
when
agree.
I refer to my experiences when I went to help in Louisiana, or when I went to help Haiti, or when I had the Caesar hurricane here in Costa Rica, or the Cinchona earthquake here in Costa Rica, etc. When I was referring to that cohesion of society, I was not implying the responsibility of governance of those elected. I
Agree.
was referring
You didn't.
to the response of normal individuals on the ground that lived day by day the situation of the crisis, where we saw then that the majority response was and has continued to be in solidarity. That social cohesion happens on those major scale events. That
So, so
and I think we have to make that.
So here's what I'll
And
say about that, and I won't even say it's like a you're where you're at versus I'm at thing, but that still makes a point to what I'm saying, because it wasn't due to, because you didn't really have, and I'll just say from based on what my own look, my own outlook, my in my humble opinion, there were not a plethora of people who did not work for actual organizations to help clean up things when those hurricanes came by. There were people who were part of their own community, actual neighbors who wanted to chip in and help out. I didn't hear many things. I didn't see many results of people who were outside who came in to come assist and aid unless they worked for an actual organization. I didn't see people all the way halfway in the Midwest or on the other side of the globe say, you know what, I feel bad what happened over there on that side of the country. I'm going to ship my ass out there to go help them. That's not what happened. It happened to people who are part of communities, which means that despite an actual internet technology informed, there were people who had to be the local people who felt the most connected to help them, which means that there was a form of solidarity in order for that to happen. And that's in this age. People still feel more empowered and more likely to help each other if they understand that they are part of a community. There are people who are at a distance, even if they say, I want to follow, I look at this person as a brother or as a sister, whatever, who's still not likely to go ahead and make that freaking trek out there unless they are being paid. Just keep it in the buck. And I hate
so
to put it that way, but
in my
that's
case, what I experienced, and I was near what was this place? Tamani Parish, Tamani. Uh, it was near Tamani Parish where we landed to help and assist. Uh, we did communicate to your government. A group of us were heading there to help, etc. We have experience on all the stuff, and my experience in this location, when we arrived, the presence of the government was, to say, lacking in many ways. No doubt. There was big problems, etc. But what we started seeing is that the communities of the survivors who were there were slowly but surely starting to organize to attend all the different problems that were happening. I met with one of the leaders. In fact, this was a while ago. I don't remember his name. I think it was Samuel, something like that, and that line of name. But anyhow, this person, I saw this person and the group of people that were around doing those efforts. So the experience I have, I have had in natural events, both in the United States and in the Western Hemisphere, well, in Latin America, has been that the immediate response is cohesion. The social cohesion is it's almost instantaneous the way that happens. However, I could concede in the sense that the bigger the populations, the harder to not know to not recognize that everybody wants to be a chef and nobody wants to cook.
I agree. I agree with that sentiment.
So it
Absolutely.
is hard. It is hard in that sense. So in that moment, and I'm only specifically and uniquely talking about the social cohesion without the much involvement of a elected official, because that relation, once we put that relation in there, there's a different um a different form
In the
of
parameters.
relation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So right now we're just basically talking on that interpersonal, civil, non-elected, and non-official
Correct.
relation in that sense. So
Yep.
just to make that clear. So the point being here, my friend, is that that I consider that the evidence shows to us that people will respond with that necessary cohesion, solidarity when the time comes. But I will concede you in something. United States and difference of Latin America, the here community and the necessities of the community of the bien común, as we can say in Spanish, or good common good,
Okay.
has a major drive than the individualism in United States. So don't get me wrong. Even if I saw those people, I did see individuals in that area
Mm.
profiting or benefiting from the disaster, which I found completely and utterly absurd. I found disgusting uh, that an individual would take the decision upon themselves to benefit economically from the disaster by selling things that should not be sold at the price they were selling it. For example, water bottles. For example, tools like shovels, etc. You know, I saw a guy who was selling a
I agree.
shovel for
I agree.
40
When
bucks.
I agree. I've seen it, and I did my research on that when Haiti had its disaster, and organizations went down there, and just how they treated people, even to the point where they wouldn't even hire other Haitians. They will only hire Americans at the same time, the way how they were treated. So I get it. I've seen those kind of examples as well. You know, I think it's appalling, but also it kind of goes back to when I'm talking about the people who tend to want to go out there are people who are paid. They're not really doing it out of, you say, the goodwill, the warm justice of their heart, which means that if you're not necessarily someone who's a part of that community, the idea of you doing it out of the goodness of your heart diminishes, even though people can vastly see it due to technology. So and again, I'm in agreement. I think we found that as actual somewhere that we can agree upon wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Now,
it's just
I do want to ask a question because Lady Luck put it up there. She asked, do you think that the gender roles of the 50s, basically the attitudes and the communities of solidarity, might have paved the way for the cult of the 60s to be able to form?
if we only focus on the United States, I would say that the rejection of certain traditional views of gender roles, of
Mm.
relation of those gender roles, clearly fueled the rebellion of the 60s, the cultural rebellion of the 60s. And that not only included the notions or the rejection of those roles, but it also included the rejection of policy of the decisions that were being made by the representatives of the time. I think one of those clear examples was the election of Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. It clearly showed to us that that there was another direction wanting to be taken. Um, so I wouldn't say that um, the attitudes and community solidarity paved the way for the cults of the 60s. It was more that the situation of the 60s was fueled by the rejection of many of the traditional roles or ideas that were placed in societies, and that pushed forward a bigger form of cohesion of people of that generation that were forming community at that moment.
Agreed. You're not gonna have me disagree with that one. That I agree. I do think a lot of what people consider to already being injustice was a great motivator to push them forward, which is why you had people like Kennedy who actually advocated for that, and that was a strong push to even to his election. So yeah, I do agree with that.
Yeah. Anyways, it's been 2 hours in, and I do have to step off. Tomorrow I got to work.
No, you're good because I was thinking about ending it anyway.
All
You're
right.
good.
Hey, listen, I'm gonna send you my email. Shoot me an email, and whatever you need to help to grow this channel up.
But we're
I'm
doing
I'm
it one
good.
person at a time, man. One person at a time, and we need people like you up here to actually have these good conversations. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
these conversations are needed. I know it's a bit different for other people, but I think these perspectives are needed and these kind of conversations to really open people up. Because I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I think even to the point where you may have mentioned things that a lot of people are not really aware of, which is why I like to ask, how are things taking place? Like Lady Luck, I was asking her how things take place, at least how they look at it in different perspective and time. Same thing for Sky, and the same thing for yourself. So I'm always interested in knowing what other people's perspectives are, because I think for the most part, even when I have the conversations, I can only do it based on what information I have here in the U.S. So I do like to know what other people are thinking around the world. So I do like it when you guys actually come up here. It's
Hey,
educational for me as well
my,
as people who do not know.
my pleasure. And I put that email there. I'm always gonna come in with facts, with the analysis, etc. And whenever if I have no facts, or I'm gonna give a personal opinion, you always hear me say, in my opinion or in my perspective. That means that I'm giving a more personal take. I
Absolutely.
rarely do that.
Sir, it's the concept of the show. I mean,
Exactly.
I even put it in disclaimer for people. Like, it's the opinions of theirs only, not like we're just speaking for in general. We're just giving the take based on what we have on our own limited perception of knowledge about what we know about whatever said the topic is. We're only giving our own thing. And the idea is that when people are listening, maybe they have the same ideas, maybe they don't, maybe they come to a new consensus because they heard something they never heard before. And I think it's a very important thing. The idea is to spark the conversation so that they can really understand, or even have their own thing to say, I'm not the only one who thinks that way, or I never thought about something like that before. And that's the whole purpose.
Mhm.
We're giving critical thought back to other people.
There
That's
goes
it.
the second one. I just put on the chat. Shoot me an email whenever, and I'm there to help. And
Absolutely.
as usual, pura vida, Beshko Woblava, my friend.
Appreciate you, man.
Take care.
You too. All right, folks. I'm actually gonna end it because we've been going on for a little bit. Kind of had a thing going on, then we're kind of pulling it back. I'm gonna take this moment to chill, see what's going on out there in the rest of the world, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed a bit of the conversation. I know we had to get a little bit of a clarification and going back and forth. I do appreciate everybody who showed up. Uh, and this those actually came up. Lady Luck, thank you for actually showing up as well as Sky. Um, we will have a show on Saturday. I don't know if I'm gonna stream tomorrow. My intention was really not to stream for today because of editing. So I may just take that time to start editing out some stuff for tomorrow as well. But Saturday we do have an episode coming up. Don't know if it's gonna be around 5 or 6. So just be advised. So when I throw out an actual community post. And as far as today in the episode that we're going through, I think that there's a lot that we pretty much try to unpack in reference to how people are looking at the 50s. But also talking about that the 50s were these decades of opportunity. And I think some people try to look at the restrictions that are actually up there, but there were a lot of things that people needed to look at. We looked at restrictions, we would look at discrimination, and it's also this idea of conformity. It's different for everybody who comes from different parts of the world, you know, and I think it's very much a complexity. And there's a lot of nuance in the history that needs to be neatly looked at and also unpacked at the same time. But the idea that people are out here just using as a talking point to say that the 50s were better times is is not truthful. It's not. There was a lot that we should actually be learning when it comes to the 50s, in my opinion. In my opinion, you know, it's not just about what was good, but also the things that we can never really take back. Um, Guys, I want to thank you, of course, for joining us on this discussion, and make sure that you actually that you subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Drop a comment if you're catching this on the back end. And of course, we got to really start talking about whether we're going to make this era the golden era, or are we just pretty much at a point of never going back? I want to hear your thoughts. I really do. So that's been your episode of Opinionated with yours truly. I am Resla. And I'm reminding you to really question nostalgia, to really challenge the norms that you actually are getting out here today. And I want you to embrace the fact that the world does change, because it is, in fact, very, very messy. And at the same time, very fascinating. Keep yourself safe, keep your family safe, and of course, stay opinionated. Later, y'all.